Welcome to the Stories Told podcast. This is episode 61, Marvel-ous Movies. This is the Stories Told podcast. Two authors talking about stories in movies, TV, and of course, books.
I'm Michael Grayford. I write action-adventure stories in fantasy and sci-fi worlds, sometimes for younger readers and sometimes for adults. And I try to always inject at least a little bit of humor.
And I am author E.W. Barnes, and I write action-adventure, time travel novels, and space opera science fiction. Thousands of years, thousands of worlds. But be forewarned, beyond here, there will be spoilers. Are you ready for the adventure? Let's begin. Welcome back to the Stories Told podcast. I'm author E.W. Barnes, and with me is author Michael Grayford. And today we're talking about the stories told in our favorite Marvel movies. How are you doing today, Mike?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. And what's new in your writing world?
Writing world, nothing new. It's the same, slowly working on the alpha draft of Zara 2, and continuing to do some little bits of marketing. That's it. Nothing too exciting. What do you have going on?
Continuing to work on the audiobook chapters. I'm 71% of the way through this last book's chapters. So that's kind of exciting. I've only got 30%, a little less than 30% more to go on it. And I am like, 75,000 words is the goal on Ecliptic. I'm at 73, but it's going to be more than that because there's so much more book to be written. I mean, it's, the wind down, etc. And there's all these threads I need to tie up. But I'm getting there. I am getting there. Hopefully I'll be finished before the end of the month. I think I'll be finished before the end of the month, but I don't want to make any promises to myself that then I can't keep because then I get frustrated. So I'll just keep working every day.
Yeah. I have the same thing as I get toward the end, like, oh, I'm almost there. And then for Zara 2, the first draft I finished, I guess, last month. I guess I finished it in February, the first draft. As I was getting through, I wrote the final chapter, and then I was thinking, like, man, there's like 10 different things I didn't wrap up in that. So I had to go back and I added like another 3,000 words.
Yeah.
Maybe more than that to the final couple chapters.
I totally know how that feels.
Yeah, it's funny.
As a reminder to our listeners, you can read The Adventures of the Empyrean Guard as it's being written on Patreon and The Tales of Zara on Amazon in both episodic format on Kindle Vella, as well as ebook and paperback formats. And the links to those stories are in the show notes. So what interesting stories have you come across lately in books, movies, or television?
Let's see. Well, I watched the Dunes, the Dune 1 and Dune 2. I watched Dune 1 and then Dune 2 in the theater for your recommendation. Oh yeah, great epic movie. Yeah. Really fun. The first one I was a little disappointed in just because it felt like half of a story. Like, okay, here's the setup for the story. And now you got to wait for Dune 2. Luckily, I didn't have to wait because Dune 2 was out in the theaters. So for me, it worked perfectly. It was just like one long movie. But I definitely appreciated the second one more. I feel like they really get into the meat of it. And the filmmaking is just so epic. He's really great at what he does. And I'm looking forward to the third one for sure. How about you? What have you been reading or watching?
I have been continuing to watch Foundation and still really enjoying it. I think it's been very well done as far as the storylines and the storytelling. It's very compelling. The characters are good. The only thing, there's a couple of things that I am a little disappointed in. But there's such small things, and you and I have already talked about putting this on our calendar to talk about, so I'm not going to go into any detail because we can go into details when we discuss the series as a whole. But they're small things, and maybe as the series progresses, they're going to make sense, and then I will be okay with the story creative decisions that were made. So, or they could be something that's completely tracking the books as well. So, I'm holding off on drawing any conclusions or having any real thoughts about it until I kind of get to the end of where we're going. But for the most part, 95% of it, I just absolutely love it.
Cool. Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking with you about it then. I doubt that it has anything to do with tracking the books, because it's more like they use the books as inspiration. Yeah. It takes some characters and very high level concepts, but the story is mostly their own. From what I remember, like I said, I read those books a long time ago, but it seems like it veers quite a bit away in the details.
Well, I'm looking forward to it when we decide to talk about it.
Yeah.
Are you ready to talk about your favorite Marvel movie?
Yes, I am.
Today we're talking about our favorite Marvel movies, and we selected this as a topic because there are so many Marvel movies available to enjoy. We wanted to see which ones we each would select as a favorite and see what the comparisons and the contrasts would be between those two favorites. Now, Mike and I have not talked about what our ultimate decisions are for our favorite movies, but I'm guessing they're going to be slightly different. I am very curious to see what you have selected and why. And I am looking forward to sharing what I've selected and why, and seeing what we each took from those movies. So I'm going to go ahead and have you start and let me know, what is your favorite Marvel movie and why?
All right, cool. Well, let me mention a few of my favorites, and then I'll lock down to just one that we can discuss. Just because I think there's a number of them that I really like that are way up there, and then I'll just talk about the one. Okay, so the first one that came to mind was Captain America: Winter Soldier. I think for me, that was when Marvel really started taking off. It has such a good story, such a great blend of intrigue and action. Everything sort of came together for that movie for me. Whereas some of the earlier movies, they were fun, they were enjoyable, but they didn't really blow me away as much. And that one started pulling in different, plot lines together, and I thought it was really well done. And then, of course, this will come as no surprise, I think, Avengers: Infinity War and Endgame, sort of as the pair. Such a good culmination of all the stories up to that point. They just delivered it so well. I loved both of those movies. I thought they did a fantastic job. But you can't really look at those in isolation. There's no way you could just sit down and watch Infinity War if you hadn't seen any of the other movies that came before. So it kind of doesn't count as sort of its own thing. And then likewise, another one that I really enjoyed was Spider-Man: No Way Home. A lot of that is because they pulled in elements from the previous Spider-Man movies, franchises, and we got to see different character development from those characters in addition to this newer Spider-Man that we've been following. I thought they did a great job for the most part. There's some issues I had with that story, but I thought it was great. It was a lot of fun. But anyway, so if I had to pick one, I generally don't like picking favorites of things. I like to leave it open as to, letting multiple ideas sort of share the same space as being really good, rather than, I choose a favorite and then it sort of keeps you from allowing other things to be at the same level. Anyway, that's just a little thing of mine. But if I had to choose one that kind of stands on its own and that I've enjoyed and seen many times, it would be Guardians of the Galaxy. Part of that for me is when I first saw a preview for it, I thought, this looks like the dumbest thing. Like, what are they? They're scraping the bottom of the barrel. What are they doing? What is this? I wasn't even going to go see the movie until a friend of mine said, it's good, you should check it out. I watched it. I absolutely love that movie. I've seen it so many times. I think the story structure is fantastic. I think the character development is phenomenal. And of course, I love humor. It's just so funny. just throughout. The comedy is just spot on. The visuals are amazing. From a storytelling perspective, though, if we're just looking at a story, I think it's such a great example to study for an action adventure based storyline in terms of having a hero's journey, in terms of characters development, in terms of setup and payoff, in terms of theme. I think they just James Gunn just nailed that movie, knocked it out of the park, and he turned what was honestly a kind of ridiculous concept and made it into something that, like I said, for me is one of my favorite movies in all of the Marvel, MCU universe. I love it. So I'm curious to hear what yours is, and then maybe we can talk a little bit more about both of them.
I guess I don't have a problem picking a favorite because I'm always willing to change my favorite if something else comes along. So I'm kind of flexible in that way. So it's like my favorite right now. I think would be the way I would say it.
Yeah, no, that's a good way to do it too.
And like you, I'm happy to offer a selection of the ones that I think are they're the ones that I rewatch over and over again. And I agree with you, Winter Soldier is incredibly well done. That is a really tight thriller story that is very well written and very enjoyable. I also agree that Infinity War and Endgame, I actually think Infinity War is slightly better than Endgame.
Yeah, I would agree.
Which is kind of funny because you would think the one that wraps up all the threads and brings you the resolution of all the challenges that come before would be the better story. But I think the tight storytelling of Infinity War and how they pulled everything together was just so well done. And the end of that movie was so powerful.
Yes.
I still remember the sort of feelings shell-shocked at the end of that movie. It's easy to reconjure that feeling again of walking out of the theater going, what just happened?
Yeah, I agree. And the pacing and being able to juggle all of those characters was just masterful.
Yeah. Now, for Endgame was also incredibly powerfully emotional. And I wept copiously in the theater, such that my offspring was embarrassed to be sitting next to me. And not when you would think I don't think when people would assume I would be crying. Because, and I think we're far enough along that there's no spoilers here, but I knew we were going to lose Iron Man in Infinity War. Because Doctor Strange had laid out his rules. I have to protect this stone, even if that means that you die and the kid dies.
Yeah.
Those were his rules that he laid out on the spaceship. And then when he handed the stone to Thanos and he looked at Tony and said, I'm sorry, I was like, Tony's going to die because that's the rule. This is the circumstance after looking at all those 14 billion scenarios. So I knew he was going to die. So I did not cry at the death because I knew it was coming. No. I cried when I realized that the cavalry was coming. When Thanos was beating the crud out of Captain America, and I was thinking, as a writer, how would I get him out of this? And then it went in my head, and I just started quietly sobbing. My offspring was like, what the heck is wrong with you? Like in The Lord of the Rings, when the Rohirrim arrive, right? That was the same kind of moment. Oh my gosh. So those are, I think, really good. But I agree with you 100%. You can't watch those in a vacuum.
Right.
Without having seen all of the movies beforehand. So it definitely is the culmination of a very long story. Another one that I really like is Ant-Man. Because I love the ensemble piece there of Ant-Man and all the people that he's working with, including his, ex-cons, friends, co-workers. And they all bring something to the table, even though it's ridiculous and hilarious sometimes. They still all bring something to the table. And especially in the first Ant-Man, every single one of them contributes to the success of what they're trying to do. And of course, I love that. I love seeing diverse characters who all bring their own gifts to the story and are all contributing to the happy ending, the good ending, the accomplishment. So I enjoy that one a lot too. But my favorite Marvel movie is the original Doctor Strange.
Oh, Doctor Strange, yeah.
And I like that because for me, in my opinion, his hero's journey, his character arc is the most difficult journey I think. And I think it's comparable to the character journey of Iron Man. But I think Doctor Strange had to shed even more illusions, pun fully intended, about himself and his life in order to achieve his journey, more so than I think Tony Stark had to. I mean, we're talking about a man of science who had to embrace the mystical. Can you imagine that leap? You know, Tony is very much a man of engineering, science too in a way, but engineering-based science, who
that's true.
Who had his engineering at his fingertips to help him become a hero. But he didn't have to give up any beliefs, so he didn't have to add to those beliefs other than I can be a hero and this is my purpose. And I'm willing to, you know, hear arguments against that. But for Doctor Strange, I mean, he walks in and says, there is nothing but this and science and all this that I learned. And then to have to make that journey to discover that everything he thought that was real and true and factual wasn't.
Yeah, there's a great setup for that too.
It's really interesting. Yes.
Yeah, when he goes there and it's like she first pushes him out of his body. That's such a good moment.
Yep. But he still even didn't believe. I mean, every step of the way, he fought that belief. He argued. He questioned. So let's talk about our favorite Marvel movies. We're talking about Guardians of the Galaxy and Doctor Strange. And one of the things we usually talk about in our discussion of stories is there anything that would change in that story? So is there anything in Guardians of the Galaxy that you might have changed?
Oh man, I'm trying to think of when I last saw this movie. There's definitely things as I watched through it where there's like little things that I would change. Mostly just, I think, where Peter Quill uses references to Earth or Earth sayings that the other characters respond to as if they got what he was saying. And it's like, they wouldn't know what this means. It's funny for us as the audience because we get it. But it's sort of, it's almost like it's anachronistic. That's not the right word, but it's something like that, where it's like, it doesn't quite fit in the universe, but it's played for humor. You know, it doesn't take itself too seriously, right? The movie doesn't really,
that's true.
It's so you kind of go with it, but even still, I would remove some of those things and make it more in-world references. And so much of it is only because I've seen the movie, you know, I don't know how many times now. Probably 10 times. Seen it a bunch. So, you know, after you watch it more and more, you start picking up on these little things like, oh, they could have done that better. They could have done this better. Just small stuff. The overall story, the characters, I think he just nailed it so well.
Yeah.
And the theme. So this movie does one of the things well that I have mentioned before, where it represents the character's growth and the character's change over the story to show that they've overcome their flaw or learned their lesson in the climactic moment. It does it perfectly. It's all about Peter Quill, you know, rediscovering family. Basically, it's a found family movie. That's kind of what it is.
Yes.
And what's the thing in the climactic moment when he's facing the bad guy? He literally has to hold hands with his friends to overcome the power of the Infinity Stone and defeat the bad guy. Right? It's like we see him doing that, and there's even a flashback to the very beginning of the movie when his mother's dying and she just wants him to hold his hand one more time. And he didn't do it in that moment because he was so filled with horror and grief. And now, you know, he overcomes that and accepts these people as his new family. It's like, it's just things like that. It's like, if you were looking at screenplay and story structure, this movie just nails like every step of the way. But when you watch it, you're not thinking about that. It doesn't feel formulaic at all. It just shows that you can make an amazing story within a structure and still have it feel fresh and unique and fun and fully engaging. I really like that about that. So let me think. Is there anything else I would change? I don't know. I guess if I had just watched it again, I probably would have something more specific. But that's the one thing I noticed as I was watching it the last few times, just like little twinges, like, oh, that line doesn't really make sense in the context of this universe. So those things I would change, but still try to keep. They're usually played for humor, so I would try to keep the humor of that and get it into the world a little bit better. That's really the only thing that's the only thing I could think of. What about you with Strange Man?
I think what I might have changed, and again, like you, this is after multiple watchings, and also an awareness of where the story went in the rest of the Marvel universe and the next movie that came out of this. But I think what I might have changed is at the end of Doctor Strange, Mordo sort of washes his hands of the whole mystic sorcerer wizard thing because of the violation of the natural law. And I understand that was a sort of a setup for a possible next story, which then sort of never happened. But to me, I think it would have made more sense, and I think would have added to the action and the climax of the movie if Mordo had abandoned them right after the Sorcerer Supreme died. After learning that she tapped into dark energy or whatever to stay alive, that's when he had his crisis of faith. And then essentially started working against them as they were fighting Caecilius and his zealots. I think that would have added, a three-way conflict which I think would have been really interesting because, Mordo's got his firm beliefs in the natural law, and Caecilius has got his firm beliefs in there needs to be a different way to stop death, and Doctor Strange and Wong have their beliefs in we've got to defend the planet. And I think that would have made for a really even more dynamic climax. Now, do I think that's a big deal? No. Again, I think it's colored by the fact that we didn't get to see anything really come out of the Mordo thing.
Yeah, that's true. I agree with you on that. I think it would have made more sense for his character to rebel at the moment where the revelation came out, where she was tapping into this, what the other realm, dark magic, whatever it was. Yeah. That would have made more sense because he had been with her for all this time, rather than later when it's like, okay, why now versus then? Yeah, I think that would have made more sense.
It just always felt so strange to me because they just won.
Right.
And the whole goal was to win. And so what if he used time travel to win? It was the only way to win. So why not just celebrate that and move forward? It almost seemed like Mordo wanted to die in the service of Camertage, or wanted to die because his faith he had this crisis of faith, but it wasn't clear. He's just sort of, I don't know. It felt disjointed and jarring, and was the only part of the movie that I think was not sort of seamless. Was that sort of like, yeah, we won, but we won by cheating, so I'm out of
here. Yeah, that's true. What did they end up doing with his character? I remember seeing him again in something, but I don't remember what.
He was in this next Doctor Strange, the Multiverse of Madness, but he was essentially a good guy in one of the multiverse worlds and was very, sort of non-combative. It just did not, the whole idea of Mordo being the next threat that would need to be dealt with, which could have been a really great story, right? Because of the relationship that they had and the mentor-mentee relationship that had been in place for them at Camertage. It could have been a really cool story. They didn't really go with that for whatever reason, and it could have been any number of reasons that they didn't do that. So, it just didn't pan out. Because they even had sort of like the post-credit scene of him stealing magic from people, from someone.
Yeah.
So it could have been a really interesting story. They chose not to go that route for whatever reason, and so that whole sort of last scene of him washing his hands and walking away I think it would have made more impact if they had made another movie with Mordo as the key bad guy or one of the key bad guys, and they didn't. And that's okay. I mean, it is what it is, right? You know, they have to make decisions that we don't know about, but that would be the one thing I would change.
Makes sense.
So is there anything that you would take away from Guardians of the Galaxy as a writer? Clearly, I think that you've already kind of talked about the seamless storytelling and the kind of storytelling and how well they did it. But is there anything specific besides what you've already talked about?
I think there's also some warmth to that story by the end of it, right? Because there's so much conflict between the characters leading up to the final act. But then we see there's a level of caring between them at the end, right? In the climax and the resolution. I think that's something you don't want to forget, right? We kind of missed that in the last Indiana Jones, for example. And then the other thing is the found family. I really like that trope. You know, my first Zara story definitely has that. Those would be my takeaways. What about you with Doctor Strange?
I think the takeaway is about the character arc and that it's okay to take a character and practically have them do a complete 180 of their perspectives of the world and change dramatically. And another thing I actually really liked about this movie, which I haven't mentioned yet, was every time Stephen Strange is about to have a major life change, there's a thunderstorm. And I love that symbolism. And it's subtle. You have to watch it a few times to realize it's happening.
Yeah, that's great. I didn't get that at all.
And I like that kind of sort of subtle symbolism that you can weave in and leave almost like an Easter egg for your fans. So I think that's kind of fun too. So that's my
that's great.
Thank you for joining us as we talked about the story told in our favorite Marvel movies. A big thank you to our Patreon supporters and all our subscribers. We are so grateful for your support and your encouragement. The Stories Told podcast is available on multiple podcast platforms, and we thank you for liking and subscribing or following, depending on where you're listening. It may not be a big deal to you, but it means a lot to us. If you'd like to make a suggestion as to future movies, books, or television that we can talk about the Stories Told, please leave a comment in the comment section on the YouTube channel. You can find Michael Grayford at michaelgrayford.com and E.W. Barnes at 1000years.com, and those links are in the show notes. Join us next time as we talk about the story told in Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle. Thanks so much, Mike. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you. This was great.
And we'll see you next time on the Stories Told podcast.